Let's get real, let's get loud on America Out Loud Talk News and Focal Point Substack. My guest today is Dr. John Lewis. He is in the departments of psychiatry and family medicine at the Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami. And our topic today is going to be diet and the new inverted food pyramid. It's created a buzz, but we haven't heard much from the other side. I know some of my colleagues are keto-carnivores or interested in eating high-fat diets, and they're big fans of Robert F. Kennedy. But we haven't heard much. Like anything else, there's a narrative and there's a counter-narrative. Dr. Lewis, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Dr. McCullough. It's such a great honor to be here with you today.
Well, can you introduce yourself to the audience, your background, and what you're doing now?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I spent about 25 years full-time at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, running clinical trials in nutrition, dietary supplements, and exercise training. Mm-hmm. I'm a physiologist by training, and I've had a long personal and professional interest in all those topics. And I've published not anywhere near your track record. I'm somewhere around, between 180 and 190 peer-reviewed papers, so not even close to you, but I'm up there.
But very solid. I mean, several hundred peer-reviewed manuscripts. I can tell you, Dr. Lewis knows what he's talking about in terms of nutrition and health behaviors. It's very important here that people do have a solid grounding in the peer-reviewed literature. For every paper that's published, that means you've read hundreds and hundreds of other papers, done analyses, teaching, journal clubs. It's just a mark of where people are. So where did you go to undergraduate and then graduate school?
I went to undergrad and my master's degree at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Miami and went to the University of Miami for my PhD. And then I fell in love with the weather down here and ended up staying and got a position at the medical school as a grad student, mm-hmm. doing grunt work, statistics, and data entry and assessing subjects and all that. And that eventually led me to meet the chairman of the department, and then I got a faculty position, and I've been there ever since. I've loved the academic environment, although like any other environment, it has its challenges. But I've been lucky to do some really fascinating research that actually is not really the topic of our conversation today, related to the dietary guidelines. But I'd love to share with you some of the work sometime that we did in Alzheimer's, because I think you would really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Big topic. Huge topic. So why don't you set the stage, though, historically on nutrition guidelines as they relate over the decades, particularly with respect to, let's start, macronutrients.
Well, historically, as you know, which has really put the new guidelines on other people like myself, and I'm guessing you too, on our ear in terms of what has shifted. And that is, if you look at just simply the juxtaposition from vegetables and fruit, which has always been historically the leading conversation or the leading component to the conversation of the guidelines. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly it's red meat and dairy, which to me is just...
It's like what?
It's shocking. I mean, it's just shocking. And of course, we as Americans, we read left to right. I mean, we're not Japanese. We don't read down the page. So they've done a really interesting job of putting all the animal tissues at the upper left. And then of course you do go across and you see the vegetables and fruits, but if you read them, which I have, and I bet you have too, mm-hmm. Yeah, it is such a difference from our historical guidelines. I mean, it's really like shocking.
Yeah, it's true. I think over the last several decades, we got the idea that sugar and starch was making us fat, related to diabetes. People quit eating donuts and Cinnabons, and Krispy Kreme donuts kind of fell out of favor. I mean, people basically got that message. Okay, so high quality sources, fresh fruits and vegetables. And then all of a sudden, this idea of putting, meat at the top, particularly red meat. So right. Can you tell us a little bit about what is in red meat? Let's say pork and steak, and let's just throw in chicken as well. What's in there from a macronutrient perspective?
Well, clearly it's mostly protein and fat, right? So we're talking about animal tissue being pretty much devoid of vitamin C. You might have a tiny smidgen in there, and it's certainly devoid of fiber. So when you look at just those two nutrients alone in this now complete shift and a push to meats and dairy, I'm scratching my head saying, well, wait a minute, where are people getting their fiber from? And again, you can scroll across to that other side on the right side and see your fruits and vegetables. But it's so heavy on protein, which I want to talk about too. But the fat issue, I guess they did stick to their guns in terms of the historical precedence of no more than 10% saturated fat per day. But now it's just all about protein, right?
Well, it's interesting. 10% of calories in saturated fat. So the American Heart Association has done the calculation on that. Well, how many grams of saturated fat does that equate to per day? And the answer is in the AHA documentation, it's about 13 grams of saturated fat. So the next question is, how much saturated fat do Americans eat before this pyramid came out?
Exactly. And how much protein was the average American already eating before this came out?
Right. So I can tell you saturated fat, I know the data. The answer is it's about 32 grams of saturated fat, well beyond 13. So
that's right.
America has a saturated fat intake problem. And, this food pyramid was put up, and one of the statements made was that, there's been a war on saturated fat, as if saturated fat had been unfairly treated and no one eats saturated fat. Reality couldn't be further from the truth.
No, I totally agree. And oh, by the way, when you look at the composition of these animal tissues, again, almost entirely fat and protein, what happens to these fats when they're cooked? One of the other disturbing things that I saw in the new guidelines is they're saying, okay, don't deep fry anymore, which I'm totally on board with, mm-hmm. But they say grill or broil these meats. Well, guess what? You're creating all sorts of genotoxic compounds from those fats when you're grilling and broiling things at 400, 450 degrees. Mm-hmm. So where's that in the recommendation?
Right. And, the great concern, let's take a heavily charbroiled steak or what have you, all that blackened, all those nitrosamines and other things that are blackened, they're carcinogenic.
That's right.
I mean, that's where the data about, cooked, grilled, or meats related to colon cancer, for instance.
That's
cysts
right.
down in the colon. But this idea of, putting it at the top, I think it's going to be confusing. One of the ways I think about this is that the polypeptides in a steak are the same polypeptides that's in a plank of salmon. That's the same. The difference is the steak is packaged in unnecessary, dangerous, disease-promoting saturated fat, whereas the plank of salmon is packaged in essential omega-3 fatty acids.
Right.
So,
exactly.
The advice, whoever was advising RFK in this, did not understand fundamentals of nutrition. It's pretty clear. Now, if you took out all that steak and chicken and pork at the top and you had seafood, I think different story. People could go along with that. But, I have had some feedback, not formally, but I want to on my show, from people who maintain either a vegetarian or pescatarian diet or even a vegan diet and, get their viewpoint on this.
Well, guess what? You're talking to a 27-year vegan.
Well, there we go. Well, you can. Okay, so here we go. You haven't eaten a crumb, a shred of red meat now in 27 years. You haven't had a molecule of bacon grease.
None.
And you look pretty healthy to me. Let's bring it back up on the screen. You got to see Dr. Lewis here. Listen, he's got a big smile. He's smart and he's healthy. And he hasn't had a single bite of steak in 27 years. So
That's
for
right.
everybody out there thinking that somehow eating steak and bacon grease is healthy for you, I got to tell you got to take another look at this. Now since we're on the topic of saturated fat, I do have to ask your feedback about the whole milk bill that President Trump signed.
Well, dairy, dairy's interesting because that's exactly where I started my vegan journey, if you will. I there was a website that used to be really active called notmilk.com. And a good friend of mine introduced me to that in the late 90s. I started reading it. And Dr. McCullough, I mean, so you can probably tell I'm Southern from my accent. I grew up in a family in Tennessee where my dad did not think a meal was a meal without three things. It had to have a glass of milk, some type of beef, and a piece of bread. You could serve that man anything else, but it needed those three things. And so we drank milk like we had cows in our backyard, and we didn't grow up on a farm. We were in the suburbs, but I didn't know any different. I really had no clue what dairy food was all about. And I start reading this notmilk.com website, and this is, again, close to 30 years ago now, which is hard to believe. And it's like mind-boggling. Like, I'm reading all this stuff about IGF-1 and all these other hormones and growth factors. And I'm like, wow, this is basically, as I believe Cohen put it in one part of his website back then, it's a hormonal delivery system. And so,
my Lord.
It makes perfect sense for when you look at it through the lens of biology, right? Like every mammal, the mother gives milk to the infant. It makes perfect sense from that perspective. So how in the world did we allow this industry, this dairy industry, to capture us into making us believe that we need cow's breast fluid to be healthy as adults? If you're a pregnant woman, you have your baby and you can't breastfeed your baby, it's totally understandable that you need an alternative. But then beyond that, why are we drinking cow's milk as a so-called healthy food, as a real food? I don't get it. I totally don't get it. As you know, no other mammal drinks the milk of another mammal into adulthood. Why are we the ones that do that? Do we somehow live beyond the realm of biochemistry and physics that we need this extra food to be healthy for our bones, our brain, our teeth, our hair, whatever? To me, I don't get it.
Are you saying that the milk that the kids drink probably has hormones passed in it from the dairy cows?
There's no question. The dairy cow, she makes hormones just like every other mammal does. And that panoply, that suite, whatever you want to call it, of all those different hormones, especially IGF-1. This one was the really the most fascinating one to me. So did you know IGF-1 is identical in amino acid sequence between cows and humans?
No.
Exactly. I didn't either till I started reading the science behind it. IGF-1, as you know, is a very potent cellular growth promoter. So when you drink a glass of milk or you eat your cheese or yogurt or whatever it is that comes from dairy, you are literally like throwing gas on the fire for growth and proliferation at the cellular level. I mean, the body recognizes it like its own. It's literally analogous between cows and humans. There's no distinction between the two, much like the microRNAs that are found in these exosomes in milk. They are constantly signaling to the FTO, to the mTOR gene. I mean, they are loading you up with all of this proliferation activity. So that's wonderful when you're an infant and you need to grow. But what about when you are now an adult and you're constantly having that epigenetic signaling? That's why we're obese. That's why we have all this diabetes, heart disease, cancer, on, because we're constantly signaling to these genes to keep growing and proliferating. And we shouldn't.
And, there was no mention of the hormones in milk at the President Trump signing the whole milk.
Zero.
And I imagine a lot of the hormones, are probably in the fat component of milk. But let me say, it's been a great intrigue about why girls are undergoing menarche, the onset of menses, at progressively earlier ages. Girls, by the way, are much taller than they used to be as well.
Right.
Men are somewhat taller. But these changes, people have said, well, wait a minute, maybe it is hormonally influenced. And I know that horse and as well as bovine estrogens are very similar. In fact, the very first version of a female human hormone replacement was Premarin. Premarin is actually horse equine estrogen. So
Exactly.
It makes me wonder now, the saturated fat in milk is just giving the kids extra calories. Now, the estimates are that childhood overweight and obesity now I think it's over 50%. So the kids have too many calories, And Trump and RFK were signaling victory on giving them more calories by having whole milk. So I looked into this on Focal Points, and guess what lobby group was behind this change?
I know exactly. The Dairy Fluid Processors of America, I'm sure.
Bingo. Bingo. So, nothing is without conflict of interest and financial interest. It takes a lot of, extra processing to make skim milk or non-fat milk. And you make the case, why do we even need it at all? And my dietary pattern is, will I have a glass of milk occasionally? Yeah, I probably would, but not on a regular basis. And, I do question what's wrong with good old water as a fluid.
Right, exactly. Have you, by the way, have you looked at the epidemiological data between the countries that consume the most milk and then the rates of osteoporosis?
No.
Have you?
Mm-mm.
So those data are very, very fascinating. And again, I have to attribute it to this homework, this path that notmilk.com led me on. But the United States, Sweden, and Norway, those are historically the countries that have been consuming per capita the most dairy. And guess what? We're the same countries that have the highest rates and incidence of osteoporosis. So where is that story? I mean,
this is astounding. There's no end to dietary epidemiology. So I had a chance to meet some of the inner circle of RFK, and I know RFK personally, and I'm generally in line with the new administration. But he is heavily influenced by keto-carnivores. Keto-carnivores. Now, and I've had some keto-carnivores on my show, and virtually every keto-carnivore I've ever met started out as being overweight and obese, and they can't get control over their food urges. They cannot control themselves. So ultimately, they find that a keto-carnivore diet brings their food urges under control, and they lose weight, and they become very nervous if they even go so far as to eat a slice of an apple. Well,
wow.
The keto-carnivores out there have been searching for some evidence that what they're doing is not harmful. This is called confirmation bias. They want confirmation that what they're doing is okay. And so in recent years, there's been a reanalysis of the Minnesota Heart Study from back in the 1960s that, by a lot of slicing and dicing and reanalysis says, well, we no longer see an elevated odds ratio for saturated fat intake and coronary heart disease. So they, and as an epidemiologist, I know, and I'm sure you as well, that, if you keep massaging the data and keep using different frames of sampling, you make what's called a type 2 error. You actually start to fail to see the signal. And then they bring up this paper by D'Souza and colleagues, published about 10 years ago. And it was based on a food frequency questionnaire, which is just a 3-day assessment of what people report to eat. And of course, saturated fat was associated with increased coronary heart disease risk as a habit. But when you slice it and dice it and say, well, did they get their saturated fat on those 3 days from a steak, or did they get it from eating a hamburger, what's called ruminant versus processed foods, there was a stronger relative risk in the processed foods, even though the ruminant group still was elevated. It just said, well, it didn't meet statistical significance. Their conclusion was, well, green light to eat as much steak as you want to. That steak is real food, that is healthy food. And this whole thing started to take off. And, I've presented the countervailing argument that we've got like 1,500 studies linking saturated fat intake from animal sources to increased risk of coronary heart disease, increased LDL cholesterol. We even have feeding studies, CRC feeding studies. What's your take on all this?
I'm right there with you. I mean, I've dabbled in a lot of statistics in my career when, I didn't have the funding to hire a statistician, so I had to roll up my sleeves and do that statistical work myself. So I agree with you. Type 2 error is definitely an issue, and especially if you're just, as we used to call it, I don't know if you and your colleagues had this term as well, but we call it a fishing expedition. Right? It's basically like you have this gigantic data set, and you're essentially trying to to twist or to show a result in your data with whatever artificial manipulation, whether it's by sex or by age group or by some other socio-demographic variable. I mean, there are just, as you well know, there are all sorts of ways that you can turn one set of data that, like you said, showed one thing initially, but then they go back and they do this secondary analysis. And again, they artificially manipulate variables. And then the next thing you know, you've got an entirely different story coming out of that. So I totally agree with you. I mean, I think it's exactly what you said. It's confirmation bias. And I mean, to me, you know, again, I've lived both extremes. I mean, not that my family didn't eat fruits and vegetables and grains as well. Of course we did. We ate a lot of those. But anybody who tries to convince me, I've thought about this so much, as you can imagine, over the last 27 years. And, you know, if you just do like comparative dental structure, comparative gut physiology, anatomy, if you look at what a carnivore that we humans call is, you know, a shark, a killer whale, a lion, a tiger. I mean, these are true carnivores, right? They don't, to our knowledge, they don't eat plants. They only eat other species. And our teeth look nothing like their teeth.
Right.
Our gut looks nothing like their guts. And they kill something, right? I mean, maybe orcas are a bit of a different example because of how intelligent they are, the way they go about their killing. But these other creatures, they find their prey and they usually grab it by the throat or the back of the neck to suffocate it if they're not already eating it while it's still alive, like a hyena. And what do? They suffocate it, they kill it, and then they eat it. I would encourage any of these people that claim humans are supposed to be carnivores, just take a rabbit, a bird, anything that you can put in your hands, bite it on the throat, kill it, and then eat it. That's a carnivore. To me, this whole notion of labeling the carnivore diet, oh, you should be carnivore, to me, it's almost mythical because there's no instinct. If you have, and I'm not talking about Ozzy Osbourne biting a bat's head off on stage. You know, we're talking about something totally different. If you know anybody who can bite another animal, kill it, and then eat it right then, all right, that's like a 1 in a billion. I don't know any human that can do that. There's no instinct that we have, and these carnivore people, they're all about natural instinct, this and that. Well, where's your instinct for biting into an animal, killing it, and then eating it? You don't have it.
You know, I officed for many years with the late William Roberts, one of the most celebrated cardiac pathologists in the world, one of the most published physicians in the history of cardiology. And he presented on the teeth of man over time and how it's impossible to conclude that man is a carnivore, that in fact man is probably we have some incisors that can tear some things, but likely we're omnivores, not carnivores.
Exactly.
And when I've talked to some of these keto-crazed carnivores on my show who start to get pretty nervous when we start talking like this, they say, well, the reason why our teeth evolved is because we learned how to cook meat and we made it more chewable. What would you say to that?
Wow.
They think that from the time man adopted an agrarian society and cooked and killed meat, that our teeth evolved.
Wow.
Do you think that happened?
Wow. No, I don't. I mean, my goodness, we're only talking, 11, 12,000 years? I mean, we're talking like that amount of time of the human species on this planet versus the total amount of time that we've been here. I mean,
there's no way. If you examine Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, there's no way. They were eating berries, fruits, what have you. This other idea that it's essential to eat other animal meats. I mean, come on, bears eat nuts and berries.
Exactly.
You see squirrels exclusively live on nuts. Exclusively.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly. I mean, as you know, every nutrient that we need that's deemed essential is made by plants, with the one exception of vitamin B12 that's made by bacteria. Everything else is made by plants. So the idea, even fish, I mean, you mentioned salmon a moment ago, even the fish oil, fish do not make omega-3s. That comes from the algae that they eat. So the idea that we need to eat any animal tissue to get our essential nutrients, to me, is silly. It's not even an argument. And
You know what was really interesting is Trump is signing this whole milk bill. RFK is there. And you know who's kind of in the background is Ben Carson. And Ben was
Yes.
in Trump's first cabinet as HUD secretary. Now he's the National Nutrition Advisor. And I know Ben personally. I know RFK personally. Ben Carson has never had a drop of whole milk his entire life because he's a Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow.
So they follow a vegan diet.
Wow.
So, you know, I think America's been hoodwinked on this inverted pyramid, the whole milk act, that the dairy and beef industry has had a conflict of interest just as bad as the other industries that pushed sugar and starches. So you follow a vegan diet. What do you do with sugar and starch, though? Sugar and starch, I mean stuff made out of wheat and flour, potatoes, rice.
Well, yes. I mean, I eat a wide range of all plants. There's maybe the only thing I don't really care for too much of is asparagus. But other than that, if it's a plant, I mostly eat it. So can we focus on that word sugar for 1 second? Because that for me is such an important word. And it actually relates back to the Alzheimer's research that I would love to talk to you about in another conversation. So as you know, there are different types of sugar in Mother Nature. You have essentially 4 categories: monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. And so we have this, I say we, you know, people in the media, people in general, we throw around this word sugar and we don't really give it the proper context it needs. So a monosaccharide like high fructose corn syrup or a disaccharide like sucrose, certainly I'll agree with those folks that say sugar needs to be kept in its place. And they're typically referring to sweeteners, of course. But then you have oligosaccharides like from breast milk that contribute amazing health benefits to the baby. But then these polysaccharides, like the ones that my colleagues and I studied from aloe vera and rice bran that, again, were part of this clinical trial in Alzheimer's, these things are like 5D structures. They are so complex. They have literally thousands of glucose units attached together by these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds, and they function like nothing else that we consume. I mean, I would put these up against anything else Mother Nature provides for us for a healing effect, other than maybe curcumin, which obviously has been very well studied. So I personally take these polysaccharides that I've studied for the last 20 years from aloe vera and rice bran every day because of their immunomodulatory activity, how anti-inflammatory they are, how antioxidative they are. They balance your immune system. We showed improvements in cognitive function. They boost your adult stem cell production. I mean, we have a whole host of papers we've published just from our lab. So I look at sugars, if you will, sugar, saccharide, carbohydrate, as being synonymous as a very important component of my diet. And adding these things in as like a supplement in a dietary supplement form, because nobody eats aloe vera, of course, but they're very important for health boosting effects. So I like, in general, you asked me, what do I eat in terms of that side of the equation? I definitely eat quinoa, couscous, brown rice, these kinds of things. Pastas made from brown rice. I mean, for me, these are staples of my diet. And then, of course, all the different fruits and vegetables other than asparagus.
Well, let me ask you something. When we got to this part of the conversation with one of the keto-carnivores who started to get pretty nervous and who just, incessantly eat meat and butter sticks and things like that, I said, you get to a certain point, you've got to have a bowel movement.
Right.
You don't eat any fiber. I said, why not just eat an apple? And at this point in time, she goes, an apple. Have you ever seen what an apple does to your continuous glucose monitoring? And she was shunning an apple as if it was going to cause diabetes. And I thought about this. I've been in practice, my 4th decade of being in practice. I've never had somebody come to my office and say, "Doctor, I became a diabetic because I eat too many apples." It's never happened. Or I eat too many oranges. It's never happened. I mean, the point I'm making is that what drives obesity and what drives diabetes is refined sugars and starches, things made out of flour. People eat lots of baked goods, lots of sugar, the sugar in Coca-Cola, for instance. The way
Right.
to think about this is a teaspoon of sugar is about 5 grams of sugar, 5 grams. And the glucose space in the body is about 20 grams. Meaning if I gave you 20 grams of sugar, you couldn't distribute it to all your muscles and tissues, and you start to get secretion of insulin. Well, heck, you drink a Coke, and it's like 42 grams of glucose.
I couldn't tell you the last time I've had a soda. It's been a long, long time since I had a soda. I'm glad you said that about
Well, hang
bowel
on.
movement.
1 second. We're going to have to take a break
sure.
for our sponsors.
Oh,
Let's
sure.
just take a break for our sponsors.
Sure.
We'll be back. We're having a great conversation with John Lewis. I think the keto-carnivores are going to be throwing eggs at us afterwards, but you're listening to the McCullough Report. Let's get real. Let's get loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. This is McCullough Report and Focal Points Substack. Pause right here. Let's get real. Let's get loud on America Out Loud Talk News and Focal Point Substack. Dr. Peter McCullough, your host, here with Dr. John Lewis. He's on faculty at the Miller School of Medicine, University of Miami, and he's a vegan. And, and I'm personally not a vegan. I'm an omnivore. I mean, occasionally I'll have some red meat, but I mean very occasionally. I can tell you probably about 80% of the time I'm vegan. Right now, I'm clearly on a vegan day. I've had a great salad. I got a little bit left, and I know tonight we're going to not have any meat. But I don't eat meat or fish most nights of the week, maybe 2 out of the 7. I'm in my 60s. I'm fit. I'm strong. I don't have diabetes. Don't have any of these problems. But I'd be greatly concerned, and I am greatly concerned with carnivores on 2 points. One is coronary heart disease.
That's right.
So, Dr. Lewis, what do we know about the fate of keto carnivores and the development of coronary heart disease? Excuse me.
Bless you. Goodness. I mean, what a great question that is. So you can look at so much data that have been published, and that's where I just scratch my head with these keto carnivore people, because it seems like they're so focused on their weight loss mission or this hyperindulgence in protein that they have just ignored decades of data that show how protein is this, well, really, I mean, what do you want to call it? Like a signaler to so many different pathways that ultimately ends in atherosclerosis. I mean, look at, I don't know about you, I love Walter Longo's research at the University of Southern California. He's done some really cool studies over the last decade, and he's actually showing in his work, and it's across all different types of species up to humans, that if you are constantly dumping animal protein into your system, you are turning on the insulin issue, you're going to get insulin resistance, you're going to become more obese, you're going to become more at risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer, and you're likely going to die earlier.
Oh, my Lord.
Yes.
Of course, the converse are the vegans, and they've been studied. The Seventh-day Adventists have been studied extensively, and they have the longest life and freedom, interestingly, from 2 things: freedom from coronary heart disease and kidney disease, but also lower rates of dementia, which we'll get to in a minute. But let me say, as a cardiologist, for sure, the saturated fat hypothesis is secure. No recent reanalysis of anything makes the reality go away. When you eat saturated animal fat, it stimulates the liver to produce cholesterol. There's higher levels of cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. And for sure, that is a risk factor for coronary heart disease. None of that goes away. When we open up a coronary artery in someone who's died of a heart attack, we find cholesterol in the artery wall. I mean, we can't deny this.
That's right.
So I'm concerned about saturated fat driving coronary heart disease. Let me say another thing about protein. Listen, I love protein too, but too much of a good thing. Protein has to be filtered by the kidneys.
That's
and
right.
lifelong increases in protein intake put a strain on the kidneys. That's the reason why the Adventists have lower rates of kidney disease. So let me ask you, Dr. Lewis, how many grams of protein do you think you eat from animal sources per day?
This is a great question. I used to be, when I was back in my drug-free competitive bodybuilding days, I used to be like very meticulous about a food diary every day. But, life gets in the way and you eventually say, I I don't have time for that level of detail anymore. But the last time that I actually did like a recall analysis, I have one of those processor programs on my computer. I was eating somewhere around 1 gram per kilogram, which is a little over the historical recommendation by ACSM and others of 0.8 grams per kilogram.
Right.
And so that's something. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something.
So what does that come out to be in terms of grams for you?
So grams for me per day, that would be roughly 60 grams, maybe 70.
60. Yeah, I could be a little bit lighter than you, but I'm probably between 40 and 60. You know, the average keto-carnivore I've interviewed, they're at 120.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're up there. And, the great concern, and you mentioned it, is cancer.
Right.
And the cancer, some of it can be driven through this kind of charcoal to process meats issues and colon cancer, but a lot of it has to do with the absence of vegetables and the absence of fiber. Every study shows a higher vegetable intake, higher fiber intake, lower rates of colon cancer. Why? Because they bring water into the stream of stool, and the body expels it.
That's right.
And so, constipation is not a good thing. People can have normally up to 4 bowel movements a day. A lot of people don't know that. It's not just one a day. But you want to clear stuff out of your colon, because when it sits there, some of the components can stimulate a polyp to grow, and then a polyp can turn into a cancer. So there are no favorable keto-carnivore studies for coronary heart disease or cancer. None. And there's a great concern that over time, these people could be in trouble. Here's another problem, is that there's not enough keto-carnivores who've stuck with that diet long enough to even study.
That's right.
And so, this food frequency questionnaire, which is just a 3-day little snapshot, is insufficient. So what I've always said is study people who have a lifelong habit, like lifelong vegans, which would be the Seventh-day Adventists, for instance.
Right.
They study very well because they're completely adherent to this over the course of their life. And what the naysayers have told me is, well, Dr. McCullough, they're too white, or they're too well educated, or they're too, they don't drink alcohol or whatever. They immediately point to these other factors. And I kind of say, listen, I really don't care. The one thing I know is they are compliant with a vegan diet. So
That's
compliance really matters. And so here we are. I think the keto carnivore community has stimulated Robert F. Kennedy, who's a keto carnivore, who struggled with drug addiction and other things in his life, to flip this inverted food pyramid and give us things that are just not tractable. Eating lots of steak, but keeping less than 13 grams of saturated fat when people eat too much saturated fat as it is. I don't think the food pyramid is that bad if you just took out the saturated fat out of it, the saturated animal fat. It could be pretty reasonable. What we want to say in the final minutes is have you give us the floor about neurocognitive decline, cognitive decline, dementia, its connections to your research.
Well, thank you for that. So we ran, this was a dietary supplement study. So we didn't alter anyone's drug use, diet, physical activity, socialization. We were working with this allopolysaccharide formula that it was based on my mentor and friend, Dr. Reg McDaniel, and his experience up to that point. And I met him about 20 years ago. He's actually in your neck of the woods in the Dallas area.
Okay.
But we enrolled people with moderate to severe severity of Alzheimer's disease, which, as you know, that's the group Big Pharma cares nothing about studying. And we put them on this formula for 12 months. And we assessed their cognitive function at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. We drew blood at baseline in 12 months. Mm-hmm. And Dr. McCullough, we showed something in this study that literally is unparalleled in the scientific literature. We showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function according to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognition, especially in people with dementia at 9 and 12 months. That's unheard of.
This is astounding. Now, what's the product again, or what's the strategy?
So it was a dietary supplement that actually, unfortunately, and if you want to have another conversation to go in more depth about this, I'd love to, but it actually was the beginning of the end of my full-time research career, because I made this discovery. I shouldn't say we, my colleagues and I tried to get more funding from NIH and Alzheimer's Association, which oh, by the way, the only way we were able to run the study was due to the generosity of this one family that had lost 4 family members to Alzheimer's. And after 4 attempts, I got that much in response.
Really?
And I said, why am I going to continue banging my head against the wall trying to get these folks to acknowledge what we've shown here that can actually help people with this terrible disease? And so I had to leave academics. I went into business based on this formulation that we now call daily brain care. But it was going from literally on cloud 9 to not even in the valley, but under the valley. We also showed improvements in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. We showed reductions in TNF alpha and VEGF. And we showed an improvement in the CD14 cells of 286% over that 12-month period. It was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. We've actually published 4 articles from that study. It was the one and only time in my career where Dr. Perry, and he's still the editor of that journal, he called me after we submitted the paper. And he goes, wow, Dr. Lewis, this paper is amazing. He goes, as soon as we get the reviews back, I'm going to publish this paper immediately. Like, this is so exciting. And so I have a hole in my heart where I could not get more funding to extend this line of research because it's potentially so valuable. And as you and I have been discussing all of these nuances and things about diet today, it's so much easier when you can just give somebody a supplement. Yeah. And not to say that you can supplement your way to good health. I'm not saying that at all. But in this case, with something as tragic and as deadly as Alzheimer's disease, I mean, we have such an amazing tool that can help people. And that's what I've been doing. I mean, I still teach students. I still lecture at grand rounds. I still do things at the university, but I didn't have a mechanism to keep supporting myself through research money because basically I couldn't get any of these so-called experts to help me. And it was just really tragic that I had to basically take a right turn in my career and do something else because I couldn't continue getting funding for it.
Well, it's one of the great tragedies of our federal funding mechanisms. It's typically science for science sake, and as soon as there's a commercial interest, they wash their hands, and then it kind of moves into the commercial space. The vast majority of research, a lot of people don't realize this, is actually funded by commercial companies, not by the NIH or other federal agencies. So the name of the product again is it Daily Brain Care?
Daily Brain Care under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition brand. Dr.
Lewis Nutrition Daily Brain Care. And is it available, on Amazon?
Yes, it's available on Amazon. It's available on our website. We are on all the typical social media channels under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition brand.
And is this for the prevention of Alzheimer's or the treatment or both?
So I look at these polysaccharides as such an important tool in anyone's toolbox. I've been on this formula for over a decade. My mom's been on it for over 13 years. My children started taking it when they were 6 months of age. My wife started taking it when she was pregnant. So yes, I mean, I look at this as from literally cradle to grave because of how immunomodulatory and how potent these polysaccharides are. And you don't get them from food. So this is why a supplement in this case.
Did they lower the biomarker TAU, T-A-U?
We did not look at TAU in this particular clinical trial. We have so many other things that we want to study. And if I had, more money than I knew what to do with, I would have already been running more trials. But yes,
But you clearly saw the cognitive function changed. That improved.
Absolutely. The ADAS-Cog, this is not my opinion. The ADAS-Cog is considered the gold standard for assessing cognitive function in people, especially in people with dementia. So clinically and statistically significant improvements at 9 and 12 months. Unheard of.
I have a great interest. Sadly, my father died of severe Alzheimer's, and now my mother has it. So I have 2 out of 2 parents with it. So I'm definitely going to pick up some of this product. And
may I send you some?
What's that? That'd be wonderful. Just because we've got to do something. I don't think, and people with relatives with dementia, they'll know this. You're at a point of where I think it's still recoverable. I mean, my mom recognizes me. We can talk, what have you, but I see the forgetfulness. I see some of these things setting in. And my wife and I are talking. She was just a matter of time where my mom would have to go from independent living over to memory care, and boy, I'd love anything to intercept it. So I'm on it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm happy to help you guys any way that I can, and I can
Okay.
share with you our papers. And
Well, terrific. Yeah. Well, we've got to have another conversation on this. On the America Out Loud platform, Malcolm Out Loud and myself, we have a great interest in neurocognitive decline. I think honestly, we've got great advances in heart disease and cancer. And if you avoid heart disease and cancer, what a lot of people live out is the eventuality of neurocognitive decline. And every year, rates of people who are cognitively impaired go up. So here we go. Great need for these polysaccharides and products. So great to talk to you, Dr. John Lewis. You've basically helped us, I think, bring some balance back to this this argument or this debate. Many have joked they haven't seen a food pyramid since elementary school, but at least we're talking about nutrition.
that's
So
right.
give RFK some credit. At least we're talking about it.
Exactly. And just to be clear, I mean, he came to Miami a couple of times fundraising when he was still running for president. My wife and I went to those. We shook the man's hand. I mean, I don't know him like you do, but I applaud him for asking all these questions about vaccines like you have and what needs to be done there. I wish he ran on a platform of corporate capture of our government. And of course that was all mostly about pharma. But when you look at the folks that wrote these guidelines, and they're like almost all either connected to or funded by the cattle, pork, beef, Atkins associations or industries, you scratch your head and say, wait a minute, what happened here? Like the advisory committee wrote this 400-page document that had a lot of emphasis on eating plants, but yet the 9 people who wrote the final guidelines basically ignored it.
It's true. And plus no meetings. What about the American Dietetic Association, American Heart Association? Why not have some meetings, have an agenda, present some concepts and say, listen, here's some new data, identify the issues, drive consensus, and then write policy. That's good leadership. I've done that my whole career. And my great concern now is we're not seeing good leadership. So far, we went through several administrations, Trump 1.0, Biden, Trump 2.0. The leadership process is absent. Now it's policy by decree. We're going to have to leave it there. Dr. John Lewis, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough.
Let's get real. Let's get loud. On America Out Loud Talk News, this is McCullough Report and Focal Point Substack. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough, your host. Thanks for watching.